I'm Alex Lloyd for Road and Track, and we're here at the Memphis International Raceway, where I'm going to drive my first ever vintage race car, and it just so happens to be the number 46 BRE Datsun 510. And under the relatively tame sheet metal body is actually the soul of a champion. After all, it was raced by legendary driver John Morton to Trans Am titles in 1971 and 1972, where it took on the heavy hitters of the Trans Am world. And when Brock Racing Enterprises, otherwise known as BRE, got hands on the 510, they took it from the showroom to the racetrack in just a single season, and it utterly thrashed the opposition. We're here at Memphis Raceway, and it's got a mixture of tight S-bends and a really long straightaway where we can open up the 510 and see what it can do. So when we take a look at the car, you can see from the outside, it's really not a very aerodynamic shape, and there's certainly no downforce being produced. You know, you look at today's modern cars, and everything's about getting the car nice and slippery to slice through the air, and they have all these little spoilers to try and help produce downforce and give the car grip. In this, in 1970s, it really was an unknown science. It really hadn't been explored. You got the front chin spoiler, which probably doesn't produce a whole lot of downforce, and wider fender flares just to accept the wider racing tyres. All the grip is coming from the fully independent suspension and the little bits of tuning that the Datsun engineers and obviously Peter Brock Enterprises have put on this car to make it go fast and handle well. The interior here is really pretty bare. We've got no passenger seat. We've got a steering wheel that's just a big piece of metal with some slight rubbering around the outside to make it somewhat more comfortable. Same with the gear lever. I mean, it's just a stick coming out of the ground. The dash, there's really nothing to it. There's a few dials that help tell you if the car's about to break down on you. You've got very flimsy door panels, you've got the roll cage that's put in, but everything has been in the essence of making this car lighter to make it go fast. So as we get ready to go, we've got these buttons here that apparently is how I started. I flick from the right to the left, and I have no idea what these things do. And here we've got the button to fire it up when all hell will break loose. Alright, it's time to go. Heavy clutch in. First gear. Try not to stall it. Alright, up to second. I can't believe that I'm actually driving this car. You know, all the way growing up, I look back at some of the history, and this car is really phenomenal. You know, it won 2 Trans Am titles. It's like a Kia coming in to GT racing and taking on the mighty Porsche and beating them. It's simply unheard of. This wasn't supposed to happen. It really was the underdog that came through and against all odds defied logic and beat the heavy hitters. In 1971, this car came in a race late, and in the second race of a 10-race season, it broke down and finished 16th. And yet John Morton still managed to win the championship in the final race at Laguna Seca. And in the final race of the season, they were battling the champions, Horsequack in the Alfa Romeo. And it was whoever was going to win that race was going to be victorious. And Horsequack, John Morton, they were bumping, they were banging each other constantly throughout the whole race. It was even. And yet, Horsequack ended up knocking John Morton out. John got it back going, but Horsequack was gone. And at the end of it, the Alfa actually won the race, but they noticed the Alfa never pitted for fuel. Obviously, the Datsun and everybody else needed to. So Datsun protested the event, and Peter Brock looked into it and said, this isn't possible. And they actually looked and found that the fuel tank in the Alfa was far bigger than the legal size. So the Alfa actually felt like they had to cheat to try and beat the Datsun. And the Datsun obviously got reinstated as the rightful champions. Although it may look like a car that's only worth a couple of grand, this is really a priceless piece of history. I mean, this is the car that put Nissan Datsun on the map in the US, especially in a performance environment. So for me to be sat behind the wheel here, driving around the racetrack, it's really pretty cool. Not many people get to do this in a car of this nature with this history. When BRE got their hands on the stock 510, it produced about 90 to 100 brake horsepower from the 1600cc engine. but after they'd done all their little massaging, they got it to produce nearly 190 brake horsepower, which is nearly double the amount of power it originally produced. 190 horsepower might not seem like a lot in today's day and age, but when you put it into a 1,700 pound race car, it really pushes you back into the seat. Mix that with the incredible engine noise, and you feel like you're going an awful lot faster. The stock 510 revved to about 6,500, and we've got this race car to about 9,500, and it feels like it will go on and on. If only I was brave enough to take it there. It's only a 1,600cc engine, and the Trans Am had a regulation of about 1,800, so it wasn't the fastest car on the market. But you know what, as we bring it down into third gear, step on it, let's see what it does. Wow, can you hear that noise? It just goes, it revs. I can't believe this. You know what, I've never heard a race car like that. And I've driven Grand Am cars, Daytona prototypes, IndyCars. I've driven basically every car you can imagine, and I've never heard a noise like that. That's quite unreal. And it just revs so high. I got it to about 10,000 right then, and I felt like I should shift because the little engine's going so high in the rev range. But you know what? These cars can take that. They respond to being that high. The gearbox is actually from the legendary 240Z car, which is the high-performance Datsun of the time. So this is a 5-speed manual compared to the 4-speed that the production car would have had. It's got the 240Z diff. The change down just sounds so nice. You'd really be amazed at how nice the gearbox is. You know, it's really smooth. The throw isn't that long. It's obviously a little longer than you to get in today's day and age. But it's really smooth and crisp. You know, I figured that you'd have to be very careful with your downshifts, making sure that you really heel and toe it nicely. You don't. You know, you really just release the clutch gently, a little bit of a blip, and everything's just fine. You know, it really is quite amazing. What's really impressive about this car is that it has fully independent suspension, and with an engine this powerful, that's really unheard of in the sedan market. When the 510 was coming into fruition, Mr. K, who's Nissan's USA president, decided that a big push had to be made to make this car sportier and more performance orientated. Even the board of Nissan decided that this was unnecessary, but Mr. K was adamant and he wanted to push forward. And when he finally got his way, Mr. K decided that this car as stock had to have fully independent suspension and even weight distribution that made the car handle great on the street and also on the racetrack, and yet it still came at the price of a Datsun. Alright, so we've kind of gone through a couple of laps here, and there's one thing that we've all really wanted to see with this, and there's one thing I really want to experience, is what happens when you really do start to gas it and give it a little bit more power, especially through the turns, and really try and see what this car is supposed to do. I mean, its handling was legendary. It wasn't the fastest on the straights, but as far as going through the corners, this thing was untouchable. So, I guess there's only one thing to do. That's for me to man up and see what this thing can do. Alright, let's get ready to gas it out of here. Way too early then, but you gotta brake early in this car. Steering takes a while to respond as well. Balance is really good, it really is. It's what it's famous for. well balanced. It weaves under braking just a little bit. The car literally feels alive underneath you. Feels like it's got a heart and a soul. So how does this car compare to a modern race car? Well, it doesn't really. There's nothing I've driven that's been anything like this. It feels like there's just nothing helping you drive the car, which is great because as a driver you want to be alone, you want to feel like you're doing the work and the car's not doing it for you. You know, there's no limited slip differential and dual clutch, no flappy paddle gearbox in this thing. We don't have power steering. There's no technology helping me drive this car. It's all down to the driver. You got to work at it. It's like a wild animal. You know, you just, even if you think you've got it and you've domesticated it, you still never know. It's a wild animal after all. Today's race cars, they're much more predictable. You know what you've got underneath you. You know what happens when you hit the brake pedal. You know, these are little drum brakes on 13-inch wheels by 6. They're tiny little things. Big fat wheels, but tiny and small. You know, I think it shows how far brakes have come over the years to today compared to what they were, where you just had a rock-hard pedal and you hit it and your first thought is, this thing's not going to stop. It shows how brave these drivers were as well. You know, these guys are out there, you know, with 20, 30 other cars, wheel to wheel, mixing up with cars that don't stop very well. There's really not much safety in these things. You know, you get it wrong, you have a very serious risk of dying. This was my first time driving a vintage race car, and I can really start to understand the allure and the attraction, the romantic nature of these type of cars. This is why there are enthusiasts that spend a fortune on cars like this compared to the exotic sports cars of today. It's been an honor driving a car like this. It really has been one of the most exciting days of my racing career, but I'm sure you've heard enough of my voice right now, so I'm just going to let the car speak for itself.